Greetings and welcome to Retention Chronicles, the podcast with learnings from expert e-commerce brands and partners. I'm your host, Mariah Parsons. If you're here, you're either on a quest for e-commerce enlightenment or you accidentally clicked the wrong link. Either way, I am thrilled you stumbled into our corner of the internet, and I hope you'll stick around. We've got pearls of wisdom for everyone, whether you're running a multi-million-dollar business or simply just starting out on your entrepreneurial journey. Before we unleash the brilliance of today's guest, let's give a shout out to our podcast sponsor, Malomo. Malomo is so much more than just another Shopify app. They're post-purchase wizards, making beautiful and branded order tracking smoother than a jazz solo, so our amazing founders, like our guests, can keep their customers happy and up to date while they track their orders. So hit that subscribe button, like it'll increase your LTV overnight, and go listen to our other episodes at gomalomo.com. That's GOMALOMO.com. Get ready for insights, chuckles, and perhaps a profound realization or two with this newest episode of Retention Chronicles. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Retention Chronicles. Super excited for this episode here today. We have Chad and David joining us. So thank you both for being here. Our listeners who are frequent listeners will know that this is the second episode that we have done on the agency or the ecosystem series, in which our former co-host Noah Rahim today is no longer joining. So you all get to chat with me today, which is I hope, a fun experience for you all. But I will pass it off to Chad first to intro yourself. Tell us about your background. Tell us about one thing in your personal life that you are excited for. And then David will kick it on over to you.
All right. Thank you. As you mentioned, Chad Fisher, I'm the CEO founder of Ambaum. We are a Shopify Plus partner and have been, oh my gosh, since November 2016. So that will be years. Yeah, coming up. Feels like a lifetime, but it's been a good run. And so, our agency is really development centric. We are, in addition to that, we're merchants first. Both David and I. David will get into that a little bit for his spiel. But we've sat in the shoes of running a Shopify store. But we really see ourselves as like a fractional CTO / development arm for predominantly Shopify Plus brands, but really high growth brands that are, in that 500,000 to $1 million a year mark on the low end, all the way up to like 30, 40 million and above. And, our skills are theme development. We can do migrations, all the really kind of like sausage making, blocking and tackling of running a Shopify store. And that's where we excel. And, things that I'm most excited about this selfishly for myself. It's being able to run. I hurt my leg like a few months ago, and it's been, I can make like a mile and a half, and I'm like getting super aggravated. It's the joys of getting old and not being able to do the things that were like, hey, this was easy. And now I'm like, what the heck? I can't even run. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I hope that journey is quicker rather than slower.
Yeah, it'll get there. It's just kind of, we'll deal with
as it was snowing in Seattle yesterday.
Yeah,
some good running weather.
This is the time of year to have it right. If it was summer, I'd be like really going crazy. But thankfully, it's the winter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally understandable. I was a collegiate rower, and so it's not lost on me the difference that weather plays in wanting to just get outside and like joints and all that jazz. It just does feel different. So. Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you, Chad. David, I'll kick it on over to you next.
Hello. David Stober, Chief Operating Officer, I guess, of Ambaum and wearer of many hats. I'll save you the entire story because it's a little bit disjointed and a little bit disparate, but I kind of started off my journey in the Shopify ecosystem as a merchant. So all the way back in 2013, I migrated my Magento store to this new enterprise platform called Shopify Plus. I don't know exactly what brand I was on the platform, but I've heard kind of top 50. So it's been a long road to hoe. And certainly when I got on board, there weren't really any developers or agencies per se. So fast forward to 2016, and I believe, Chad, I was the first Ambaum agency. So Chad and I have a long working relationship. We actually have known each other since elementary school, and kind of rekindled the friendship and the professional aspect of that by me needing a developer in the Shopify ecosystem. And sure enough, Ambaum and Chad were there as newly anointed Shopify Shopify Plus agency partner. So spent the next 4 or 5 years running a kind of a small form print and packaging company online. Subsequently ended that and exited that in 2019. And Chad and I realigned again and said, God, we got all this combined scar tissue on the merchant side. And, we kind of know what brands are thinking and feeling and fears and happiness and joys. And we felt it all and thought that, combining efforts and me joining Ambaum was a good setup. And that would be, provide a lot of context and color for the brands that we work with. So today I spend half my time talking to really cool brands, trying to align and figure out solutions, kind of get into the weeds from a PM perspective on the solutioning side. And it just comes from, having 10 years in the Shopify ecosystem. So we think we're a little bit unique in the fact that we kind of have that context, have that merchant first experience. Building the Cadillac always isn't the right answer, and kind of incrementally getting better and kind of phasing things out a couple of years, depending upon wherever the brand's at in their life cycle. We think we're a little bit unique, and that kind of sounds like a self-licking ice cream cone, but we think we're a little bit unique in the ecosystem. So we're excited to have the chat.
Yeah, for sure. I always like when we have someone who's been in the Shopify ecosystem for a little bit longer, like the early-ish days of Shopify. It's always interesting for me, who's joined the ecosystem, when it's been the leader, right? It has its own entire own entire network. What was it like with around, what did you say? What year was it?
2000, late 2013.
13. Okay. What was it like in the ecosystem at that point? I know you were hopping from Magento to Shopify. What kind of triggered that for you, David, to bring like the story?
I think the story still holds today, right? And Shopify would probably want to hear me saying this, but at the end of the day, it's about playing offense rather than defense. And when you're a Magento store, you wake up and you're like, God, I hope my store's up and something's not busted, and you're spending all this money on playing defense. And whereas on Shopify, it's kind of like you spend all your time thinking about the brand, thinking about how you're going to grow, thinking about how you're going to engage with your customers. So it's just, to use that sports analogy, it really is playing offense. From an ecosystem perspective, there really was no ecosystem. It's probably why we were paying $99 a month for Shopify Plus going all the way back then. But it's been a really interesting kind of experience to watch it grow and develop, and, have great apps and partners like Malamo kind of pop up and fit really specific requirements that, brand owners and merchants just want to kind of solve for. So it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, I love it. And then Chad, what would you say, seeing like from the agency side, what Shopify was like almost eight-ish years ago?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I think back to, they don't have this concept, but they had Shopify Unite, which was a partner developer conference. And so started all the way back in San Francisco, then they moved some of them to Toronto. It's kind of a shame they don't have it. The pandemic and COVID kind of knocked it out, and I'd like to see them get back to it. But it was those initial conferences were kind of what gelled the sort of like the three entities of Shopify developer team, the app ecosystem, and then agencies like us. And so to be there really early was fantastic, because you got to learn about all the new apps. You got to learn what was happening from the inside of Shopify. And so, the growth of Shopify, because initially with Plus, kind of like David was saying, when you're a Plus merchant, the features were pretty limited early on. Like, it was a beta product. I mean, there wasn't, there was the delta of what Shopify Core was, but then there was only so much more that they could offer on Plus. And then as, 2017, 2018 came along, they just dealt with like the flood of Magento and so many other platforms that were kind of they were kind of failing in a sense, and people were moving over to Shopify. And so there was crazy growth early. Like it was just like it was a flood of Shopify was starting to execute, and then all these other platforms were kind of having mistakes that were causing a ton of merchants to move over. And so it was exciting. Like it still is. Like now it's a little bit different, where it's not like there's a flood of other, frankly, a lot of people like yourself and everybody, they'll know about Shopify. Like they've heard about it. Shopify is kind of the de facto leader in the space. So now what I find really exciting is the pace of development that Toby and the team, especially since Shopify Editions launched, with the new winter editions just coming out, there's so much that's happening that it just gives us a ton of energy as an agency, because we can talk to our merchants about, hey, here's things that we think will be of value to you and will help improve your store's performance.
Yeah, I love it. And I've also thought of it as, because Shopify is able to enable so many people to get their product off the ground without, having all these, these barricades or hurdles that you have to get over. The flood is probably less so from people switching over to just more people creating more brands, and like a flood of just new ideas and people being able to see like, okay, this is the growth that you can have within, your own small team, instead of having to have maybe a more traditional team where you have to find a bunch of talent before you can kind of get sales and revenue generated. So with that, I realized I said 8 years as well, but quick math, 10 years that you all have been in this in the ecosystem. I know that we, in these ecosystem series episodes, want to dive into the tactical side of things and want to talk about strategy. So what all would you like to share with our listeners today? Would love to hear kind of the expertise that you would like to impart and like dive into the tactical side of things, because it's always so much fun.
David, you want to start?
Yeah, mine's going to be less about kind of the real specifics in terms of the Shopify stack, and more about the brands, right? Like, I just think it's so fascinating that, in today's climate, you can napkin an idea and kind of launch with some level of a product. I mean, assuming the product or the widget or whatever you're selling is there, you can go from 0 to 60 and nothing flat and have a real brand, right? So, that might be scary for some other agencies where you're going, are we getting marginalized, right? Whereas, our kind of core business is really like, look, Shopify is this fantastic platform that we're all like living in right now, and kind of the ecosystem. But at the end of the day, it's a tool, right? And I don't want to minimize it, but it is a tool. And at the end of the day, the brand has to be a brand. And there's now a growing number of things that are starting to touch this tool, because the tool itself is getting so robust. Whereas that's what, we take comfort in. More and more things are touching Shopify every single day. So if you think about our core specialty, it's fractional CTO, it's back end, it's front end, right? And I want to marginalize and basically say that front end development is a commodity, because it certainly isn't. But with this increasing number of things on the back end that are touching Shopify, that's just, it's job security, it's agency security, it's, a long runway of things. And I think for me, what gets me going every single day is more and more things are touching this. So it really is leveraging our kind of business set, right? And our ability to kind of put our merchant hat on and say, if I was this merchant and I was either raising money today, or I was optimizing for top line growth, or optimizing for, bottom line profitability, depending upon where I am in my brand curve, kind of putting that hat on and saying, this is what I would do, right? Like, this is how I would attack this. And maybe I wouldn't build this. I'd go buy this off the shelf, kind of run with this for 3 months, 6 months, a year, because I don't want to incur the development debt. We approach those in a very comfortable position where we can actually do that without basically saying, hey, we want to go charge you for as much as we can charge you. And it's kind of a long roundabout answer, but I think all those things touching Shopify is what gets me going, because increasingly more and more that's going to be the case. Whether it's like financial instruments, whether it's banking, whether it's inventory systems, whether it's CSR and kind of online, offline kind of experiences for brands. Those are the things that kind of excite me, and I think that we can leverage our kind of backgrounds for.
Yeah, wonderful. So quick question that I want to double tap on, just because you mentioned someone taking inventory of like where on the brand curve they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that we don't talk about a ton on this podcast. So for our listeners, can you kind of explain that a little bit more in depth of why someone would want to kind of take that into account, just considering what they're doing with their company?
Yeah, I'll throw my 2 cents. I mean, kind of depends on the business and how hacky you are. And if you're a brand owner, you can hack together and run a $5 to $10 million business by yourself on Shopify, right? Like, that's the exciting part. Granted, you might butt up against some ceilings, and you might kind of have to evaluate your opportunity cost of doing that. And I can certainly put myself in those shoes when I was running my brand, right? So, I kind of look at it through the lens of, 0 to 1 million is, you can kind of, it's a free for all, right? You're this, got to get in the game, do whatever you can do, kind of hack it together. Sometimes if you're funded, you can get engaged with somebody like us a little bit earlier. Potentially that can last. But, when you start getting to the 2 to 5, kind of like whenever you're assessing being on Shopify Plus, that's when, we kind of become very, very relevant. So from a brand perspective, I don't think there's any one answer, being Shopify Core, Shopify Plus, whether you have an agency, whether you don't have an agency. There's no silver bullet for that. I mean, it's going to be brand specific. I don't know, Chad, if you have anything else to add to that.
No, not to that. I'm gonna play off what you'd said there. You should just transition into it now.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. So this, when I sit back and think about, and I know you were kind of asking about like tactically, I don't know, kind of advice for merchants, but really what I like to think about is where Shopify's headed, like directionally, like what are they doing? And, as I kind of said earlier with Shopify Editions, the pace of development, that 6-month cadence, it's just brought such a professionalism to the organization. And it's something that's given, I think, just like I said, selfishly for us agencies, a lot of energy. Apps like for you guys like Malomo, there's so many things that you guys are doing. I'm sure that you have to kind of think about where they're headed and like how are you going to play with, think about like checkout extensibility and like this whole script deprecation and functions taking over. And there's so much around the checkout that's going to be just absolutely shaken up. But when I really zoom up, a ways, and I think about, okay, well, what's Shopify really doing? One, that they're going up market. Like, they're really looking at enterprise. I mean, they, as you kind of mentioned earlier, Mariah, like, you can get started. And as David talked about, like, it's super easy to just get going and like throw a website up, and you could get, frankly, a couple hundred thousand in sales in months if you really are dedicated and have the right, kind of product market fit. But what's the beauty of it is that Shopify is now starting to cater to like that 50 million, 100 million, 200 million and up crowd. And it started with hydrogen, oxygen, headless, giving them an opportunity to, here's a platform from a speed perspective. But where really, it continues to evolve is in the B2B space. Like, that's where I get really excited, because I think there's a lot of merchants, and I know there's a lot of merchants that we deal with that are D2C only, but there's plenty of them that have talked to us and been like, hey, we really would love to set up, companies, tiered pricing, like all these different like fundamental B2B functions that Shopify didn't really have a great answer for. You could kind of like hack it together with apps, and you could do their now deprecated Shopify wholesale channel. But with the whole B2B admin functionality, it really gives this space for brands to kind of branch out and start to consolidate all of their energy around Shopify. And as David mentioned, we see ourselves as fractional CTOs, so Shopify is kind of like the hub, and there's lots of stuff that spokes out, like whether it's an ERP or, you've got other custom software or a 3PL you need to connect to. But Shopify is thinking about that the bigger companies have a complex stack and they need that composability. And so I think that's where, I don't know that that's a great tactical kind of like piece of advice for brands, but I just more see it as like idealistically where Shopify is headed, and that's what I think is really neat from an agency perspective and from a merchant perspective as well.
Yeah, for sure. So really interesting way of looking at, I guess, the timeline of Shopify and like their announcements, and then also trying for a merchant trying to, I guess, stack or trying to overlay or trying to plan like best that they can. So with that, with keeping what Shopify is starting to march towards, are you approaching, like when you're working with your the brands that you work with, are you seeing merchants taking the stance of like, okay, I'm aware of it, but I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing? Or is it like part of their, I guess, overall company strategy of like, we know that now Shopify has rolled out this capability. So like, is that a new North Star? Does that question make sense?
I think I understand
Totally.
what your implied question there is. And it's by and large, our merchants will hear about things that are happening with Shopify, but they do not have near the level of granular, like level of understanding. And it's okay. I mean, that's what our role is. Like as a fractional CTO, I mean, we're there to provide guidance and advice. So there are some circumstances where they're coming to us and they're saying, hey, we need, but in many cases, we're advising them and saying, hey, by the way, like take the checkout upgrade. Like that's a huge thing that's happening this summer. And it's a big deal for a lot of our merchants. And so we have to plan and work backwards and think about all the apps that are leveraging checkout and what are the, they have scripts, they have customizations that are done, the checkout process that we need to upgrade. So I'd say the majority of it is us coming to them and being their trusted advisor. And but there are some of our brands that are on it.
Yeah, I think another point is that, to your point, it does give us a little bit of a true north kind of star where we're guessing a lot less. Where historically, like to Chad's point, B2B was a big thing. Like you're hacking together systems that shouldn't be hacked together on Shopify. And in some cases, you did that for such a long period of time, and then all of a sudden, Shopify drops all these announcements. So we were guessing. Now there's a lot less of that with additions. So we know areas that we need to tread lightly and kind of think about this through this buy versus rent versus build, all these different decisions. So we don't kind of box ourselves into a corner where we're going to build something and incur a bunch of development debt on behalf of the brand. And then all of a sudden Shopify is going to drop some like boom, like B2B kind of situation, like what Chad was talking about. And, and for us, it's increasingly more relevant because, a good chunk of our business, we have our fair share of high flying, sexy D2C brands, but by and large, the brands that pay our bills are a lot of like very complex back-end B2B, tons of sausage making, what Shopify might consider to be legacy businesses, parts businesses and such. So for us, it's really important because we care maybe a little bit more about the back-end plumbing than other brands do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, excuse me, other agencies do.
Yep. Yeah. So with that, have you seen any patterns emerging of like certain areas in the customer experience that you would say to a merchant of like, you should definitely have this in-house versus you can have like an app kind of supplement into your Shopify store and like cover that? Has there been any delineation of like, okay, you always want to have like let's take post-purchase experience with what Malomo does, right? Like you always want to have that be of this standard, or because a lot of the things that we like there's a Shopify out of the box experience with post-purchase that I'm sure you all are aware of, but then there's also the added benefit of having something like Malomo that you get the control back from the Shopify out of the box, like non-branded, strictly transactional information, crucial information that a merchant needs. So is there anything that you're seeing that you're advising brands of, okay, like this is like, I guess, table stakes around what you can and should dedicate a lot of their time and energy towards when you're looking at, okay, like this is the bet to make when maybe Shopify is going to build something out here, make the out of the box, quote unquote, experience better for Shopify Plus brands or anything of that sort?
I'll start, David, on this one. So philosophically, how we look at the different functions in Shopify. And by that, I think of it in terms of like, you can kind of carve up all the different processes around a transaction online into kind of like sub processes. So some of those, like if I work backwards, like what Malomo does, and you think about like post purchase, checkout, then you have checkout. And I know this is a funky way to look at it, but like cart, collection page, product detail, and then homepage. I know I went absolutely backwards through that process. But if you think about it, and then you've got lots of other things that kind of connect off that, whether it's like inventory or subscriptions or transactional emails or marketing emails. So the point of all that is to say that philosophically, if there's anything in that funnel or in a process that touches that funnel, we are going to tell our merchants, hey, if there's an app that handles that, we're not going to build a custom for you, because the app is going to be putting so much energy into updating it. And it's not, you don't want to pay us to do that work. Like, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And, Shopify in their, what they've started to do is, it's kind of like they're kind of frenemies with the apps, right? They've got their own, Recharge deals with this with subscriptions. They've got their own subscription. Klaviyo deals with it with email. You guys deal with it with Shopify. So every one of them has that kind of concept. The way David and I, and frankly, Ambaum, the way we see it is that Shopify's version is like the vanilla starter package. Like it's like the gateway drug, right? You can try it, maybe you like it, and then like you should graduate, right? Like let's get into the, the apps that are really going to give you the power to give you, the sales and generate the revenue that you need. So and then often above and beyond that, we can do some customizations, and that's where we kind of come in. But if there's an app or Shopify can handle it, we want that to be the case.
Yeah.
I use sports and Chad uses drugs. That's his analogy.
Yeah, no, exactly.
We love all the analogies here, so we welcome all.
Equal opportunity employers.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I think Chad touched on something that's kind of important. It's kind of that high leverage versus low leverage, and I'm not saying post purchase and some of these things are low leverage, but things where you're constantly iterating and testing and changing, that should be done by the brand, right? Like the brand should own that. The brand should test it. It should be easy enough for the brand to manage. Certainly from a development perspective, we may or may not need to snap in and do some custom like landing pages for Malomo and kind of lean into that. But at the end of the day, there's a healthy amount of responsibilities that need to lie with the brand because they own it, right? And there's things that should lie with us because it's infrastructure and building the foundation. So that's another way to kind of evaluate it, is in terms of high leverage and low leverage. And, we're in the business of charging for high leverage, not PM, not administrative stuff, high leverage, nasty, shove cookies and Red Bull under the door and someone pounding on a keyboard for 5 hours building really crazy shit, right? Like that's the cool stuff.
Yeah, I love that analogy of the high leverage and low leverage and trying to differentiate it there, because I think a lot of the times when we're talking about like a tech stack, it's like table stakes, what your tech stack should be comprised of, but thinking about it or thinking through the lens of what do you want to control from in-house to with your agency to then the tech that you're also implementing, I think is a cool way to look at it that we haven't specifically emphasized on this podcast. And is there, so for like high leverage versus low leverage, I know like development side of things, my mind, because I'm in marketing, goes to something that you're trying to control and test a lot is like around ads and like anything that's basically like CRO, conversion rate optimization. Is that anything that you all have seen like patterns with, of like most brands want control over that, or really they're willing to outsource it to something else?
All over the map.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and
as it
and
usually
it
is, right?
Yeah. There's no right answer with that as well. We have some brands that I swear have never even looked in the admin before of Shopify.
Crazy.
We have other brands that we spend a lot of time deconflicting because we're all kind of touching it. And then, we think, arguably, I would say the brands that we think work the best are the brands that they own that customer part, the product part, the engagement part, the words part, the brand part, and then they iterate, test, and that's, your guys' product is a great example of, kinking some little words on the landing pages, or introducing, upsell opportunities and surfacing some of those with, say, rebuy, or kind of getting really crazy, like finding those little kind of green fields of like awesomeness when you said the right word with the right image, like that's magical. And that's not us. That's your brand. That's the brand. That's the merchant's brand to own. We just want to provide the infrastructure, the proper infrastructure, so they can go execute and go as crazy as they want to go. Like, said another way.
Yep. I love that. I think that's a great note to wrap up on. It seems like this 30 minutes has flown by, but I want to give our listeners, if they either whether they're a merchant that could possibly be just starting their brand and looking to have some help, or a merchant that is in dire need at this exact moment, can you let our listeners know where they can find you so that they can reach out to the Ambaum team and discuss things with both of you?
Yeah, obviously ambaum.com is the great place to start. We got a forum there. We're on LinkedIn. The three of us are pretty active there. I mean, those are probably the two biggest channels.
Yeah, I mean, we're at all the events like Shop Talk and
there you go,
and all the tech events as well. But where we really begun to lean in is actually at the events where the brands are at. So we spend a lot of time at Expo West, Expo East, BevNet, SEMA, parts kind of things. So our evolution is getting in the weeds and talking shop with brands and talking about crazy stuff. So that's where we like to live.
Wonderful. Have you found, because I know I went to Shop Talk last year. I'm going to pose the question, even though I just started wrapping us up. But in terms of events like merchants, I know that's something that, like you said before, pre-pandemic, maybe there's more attendance on the merchant side. But what events are you specifically finding that brands are going to and engaging with a ton? Because I know with Shop Talk and like e-tail, but I always love to hear the opinion of.
Not those. Probably more at the industry level, right?
Yeah.
Chad. I mean, it's that's what we've found the greatest success is kind of roundtabling with really cool food and bev brands or parts brands or CPG kind of brands, and just comparing stories, comparing notes. We can put our little brand hats on and merchant hats on and say this is what we did way back when, which may or may not be relevant anymore, but that's where we tend to find the brands that we think can benefit from talking to Ambaum.
Yep, I'd agree with that. That's been my assessment as well. The big industry events, totally different. Were you going to add something in there, Chad? Or
not much more, but I basically just reiterate, the Shop Talks, e-tail West, like those are great from a app to agency relationship perspective. They're tougher from a finding a merchant perspective. It's really going to where the merchants live, and that's in the industry specific events.
Yep. Wonderful. Well, David and Chad, it has been great to chat with you both. Thank you for making the time. Excited for this podcast to go live. Our listeners, I think, are going to have a fun time listening to this, and always do, with Retention Chronicles. So thank you very much. I've had a blast having you here.
Thanks for hosting us.